Let's get into it. Soul Not For Sale podcast. We got Joe Rogan talking with a scientist who has decided to stand up to the rest of the scientific community and go rogue, as she puts it. Now, I just wish more scientists would do this. I wish they would stand up. I wish they would say something. I wish they would push against, call out certain scientists that are getting away with a bunch of nonsense. And she kind of does, but I just wish it would happen in a larger community of scientists would just all stand up at once. It would be a great thing to see. Let's get into that clip. Don't forget about IamCoachColin.com. There's a link in the description. We got Soul Not For Sale. We have the Great Reset, X'd out, the Great Resist, and we have Public Enemy #1, which I am wearing right now. Discount code is IamCoachColin, all capital letters, all one word, 1 L in the name Colin. Let's get into this clip.
Too, especially because you are the father of 3 girls. A lot of these issues I'm talking about have to do with young people, especially Generation Z. And I guess I want to start by, unless you want to, I have a whole list of things I want to talk to you
let's go right into it.
Okay, so I know you appreciate all of the craziness that's been happening in academia in terms of I watched Yuri Bezmenov. I know you talk a lot about him and the defector. And I feel like he must be psychic or something, because what he describes in terms of ideological subversion and how to control basically an entire generation by going through academics and teaching them at a young age how to think, what to think more specifically, and how to then get people to a place where they can't agree on what objective reality is. That's essentially what's happening on university campuses. So for myself, having come through academia, finishing my PhD, realizing that I wouldn't be able to stay there and do legitimate research anymore, and so I have to come on I have to come on the biggest podcast in the world. I'm very excited and grateful to be here, but I'm like, why don't I just do my own research and do it this way and not have to be constrained by a particular way of thinking, or knowing I have to find certain things with my research in order for it to be published. And if it does get published and it goes against what activists want you to say, it's going to get pulled. Your findings going to get pulled. You're going to end up homeless anyway. So might as well just go straight from A to B.
The Yuri Bezmenov interview from, I think it was 84.
Yeah.
Is so crazy, because back then I'm sure people were like, come on, this is nonsense.
Yeah.
This is not. But if you look at it now in 2023, like, he was telling the truth. He has to have been telling the truth. And that the Soviet Union had planned this out for generations, and that they knew that this was going to be a 10, 20, 30-year project. And it's been successful. And the fact that these academics, these people that we count on to think for us, we count on to be, the shining light of intellectual discourse, they have completely fallen captive to everything that he described, and that they are sending that out into the world, this mind virus, and essentially eroding all of our confidence in government, all our confidence in civil discourse, all of our confidence in our ability to get along and to understand objective reality. It's crazy that what he was saying is exactly what happened.
It's pretty brilliant, though, I have to say, the way that this has turned out for ideological people. If you're pushing that agenda and you've managed to convince an entire generation, because he was saying in the interview it's going to take 15, 20 years at least to clear out that way of thinking. Because when you go to university, and I can definitely relate to that, when you are young and you're impressionable, you don't stop and think, maybe my professor is lying to me, or maybe my professor is trying to trick me into thinking in a very biased way, in a particular way, because they want to see certain changes in the world, and this is how they've chosen to do it. So yeah, I guess they probably didn't know back in the 1980s that this is how it would unfold in terms of the internet and social media being so powerful in disseminating a particular way of thinking. But it's been very, very effective. And I think especially when you look at mental health, I know you're a big fan of John Haidt's work. I love his work as well. You look at young people and how much they're struggling nowadays, and social media is a big part of that. So this new project I'm working on is really interested in looking at how did we get to this point? How is technology influencing our lives, and particularly our sex and dating lives? Because I do think social media, apps, what else, like filters, I know you've talked about, just everything in terms of how men and women relate to one another is almost completely upside down compared to, I would say, even a decade ago. So one thing that really stood out to me in recent months is this adoption of something called a positionality statement. I don't know if you've heard of this before.
No.
So this is a statement now that researchers, including scientists, have to include in their research papers. And it basically discusses their race, their sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, all of their personal characteristics, traits, like basically identity markers, as a way to, I guess, apologize if they're white. which is something white people should not have to do. Especially if you're in the sciences, you shouldn't have to talk anything about your personal life because that has no bearing on what you're doing or what you find. It is so cringeworthy. It's when I read these statements, it honestly feels like I'm reading a hostage statement. I feel so sad for these people because especially if they're white, they're like, this one guy, this poor kid. So usually it's in the context of a scientific paper that's being published. You know, the editor will say, we are now adopting this. You have to include this as part of your submission. And if you don't include it, they're probably just going to throw your research in the trash when you submit it. But if you are a student, like you're doing a PhD or a master's, some schools will force you to include this as part of your dissertation or thesis. So I can't imagine when you go to defend at the end, when you're finished all your research and you're basically presenting it, you're being interrogated, having to add this cringeworthy statement. This one I read, it was this poor kid. He was saying, you know, I'm white, I'm from the US, I have privilege in these ways. They went to, I think, Africa to do their research there. So he was talking about how he might have been privileged over the people he was studying. And then he went on to describe the characteristics of his research partner, who was also white, but he's saying she's a white woman who's from here and she had this, you know, socioeconomic status. And I just thought this is so irrelevant. And it's also so uncomfortable that you would have to talk about your colleague in this way. And I just can't believe that there are people who are actually on board with this. So to me, science is completely lost. I don't know how it's going to come back from this because I think the public is already extremely skeptical, as they should be. And so for me now, I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going rogue and just doing my own thing.
Well, a lot of journalists have found themselves in that same position too, right? A lot of people have just gone to Substack, people that were working for the New York Times and all these, before very reputable institutions, and now they find themselves ideologically homeless.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, so I'm a journalist now too, and I found the same thing that, you know, there were some left-leaning media platforms that I could write for very easily before. Last time I was on your show, I just want to clarify because I know a number of people quite upset with me when I said I was a liberal and I'm also pro-science. I'm definitely not saying that because someone is politically liberal or left-leaning that they are pro-science, because definitely I think over the last 3-4 years we see what quote pro-science means. So I think you can deny science regardless of where you are on the political spectrum. And I definitely, my work for the most part calls out, I'd say, left-leaning science now, because I think liberals are getting away with it the most right now because they have such a chokehold on the culture and our institutions more broadly.
Well, the really disturbing thing is that they've abandoned the idea of what science is supposed to be. It's supposed to be objectively assessing data and looking at numbers and looking at measurements and looking at the reality of the situation and not putting everything through an ideological lens. The fact that they're doing that first and that they have to list all their biases and like their privileges and all this different shit and their gender and all that craziness is just like they're essentially saying that that's more important than the objective truth. That's more important than the facts and the measurements and the data.
Also that they have such difficulty in calling out anti-Semitism, because I was watching your podcast from yesterday, I think it was, and I'm just appalled. I'm appalled at the fact that you're in an environment where, like, there are students who are literally afraid. They're locking themselves in the library to try and be safe. This is not acceptable to me. And the fact that you have speech codes that are designed to protect other groups, presumably, but yet groups that are doing well in society, like Jewish and Asian people, we're considered white now. So it's okay to discriminate against us, as you see with affirmative action and as you see what's happening right now in terms of the Congress hearing. So I just don't know how academia is going to come back. At this point, I really have just said, okay, well, I think we're going to have to wait another 15, 20 years, and hopefully alternatives will be built up.
That is a good point. And I'm going to go into another clip in this podcast, very short one, really quick. But yeah, this whole thing's very interesting. Especially, it's interesting to hear it from a scientist, because for the most part, a lot of us have been gaslit to think that what we thought about the past 3-4 years was nonsense. And that if you were listening to XYZ, you're silly, you're nonsensical, how dare you do your own research? And now it's just, now you're hearing other scientists say, left-leaning scientists get away with this, like how is there even right and left in science? How did that even happen? I really don't get it. But I guess the way it happened is the fact that it's in schools now, right? So I'm just going to jump over, just play a small other part of this clip really quick, because I wanted to touch on this as well too, because Joe Rogan's kind of wondering how certain things in history actually happen. And I think the past 3-4 years, 4 years ago now, I think we can kind of understand how a certain event in history happened. But let him talk for a second.
Of major universities that aren't just unwilling to call out anti-Semitism, they don't seem to have a problem with what these people are saying. And they seem to be trying to find some way to either apologize for it or just dismiss it. It's like to say that it has to be actionable when you're literally calling for death to the Jews.
Depends on the context.
It's insane. What kind of
So
context
ridiculous.
is that okay? When? I mean, when people when I was in high school and we would look back on the Holocaust and we'd look back on World War II when you study it in school, it was always confusing. Like, how did this happen? How did anyone just decide that one group of people is okay to exterminate? And how are these like modern, anatomically similar human beings to the people that are living right now, like when, in the 80s when I was in high school? And when we're thinking about this is only 40 years, which is so crazy. So we're literally talking about like as if something happened in the 90s today, which is so crazy. It's so hard to imagine that like something from like 1989, like, or let's say when I was in high school, I graduated in 85. Imagine there was a Holocaust then, and we were trying to understand it in 2023. It's so recent. Like how? How did they do it? And then you see these professors or these teachers, these presidents of these universities, you go, oh, this hasn't gone away at all. This is like, we're still insane. We're still insane. And not just insane with like some meth smoking dictator who's in Germany. No, a fucking president of Harvard in 2023. Like, what is happening? How is this possible?
No, I mean, the reason I had that little part play because, 4 years ago, I think we all understood. Some of us who didn't do the thing, we understand exactly what happened with those people, how that event in history happened. They othered people. They made up a bunch of things about these people. They branded them, somebody who thought like me, who didn't want to do certain things. It's racist, misogynistic, stupid, selfish, conspiracy theorist, dumb. You name it. Prejudice. Whatever you want to throw. We got called everything. And if you're like me and you didn't do the thing, you were probably wondering, are they going to come and kick in my door? Like, is that going to happen? Are they going to come for me? Because I'm not doing it. I'm not going along with what they want me to go along with. Biden's talking about our patience is wearing thin. I think his press secretary said it's going to be a winter of death for those people. What? Trudeau was in Canada screaming about people not getting on the buses and trains and planes and why should they get to go to the grocery store, and Jimmy Kimmel was talking about it's okay if they die and this and that. I think we all understand how the Holocaust happened. I think those of us who are, you're like me, you're pure blood like me, you understand exactly how it happened. It was just a lot of that for years, and they just ramped it up and ramped it up and ramped it up. If we got just 2 more ramp ups, 3 more ramp ups, we would have been in the same situation as those people. Would have been taken to a place. Who knows? Who knows what would have happened from there? You had guys like Sam Harris saying it's okay if we had it forced on us. It was wild. It was wild. So I understand completely how the Holocaust went down. I get it. I 100% get it. Because I was almost in the same situation, just based on some choices that I made. That's how it happened. But yeah, that always gets to me. I didn't want to bring that up. Can't really bring that up around here, you know what I mean? This platform. But going back to what Joe started on, the whole Yuri thing, Yuri Bezmenov. Now, if we're talking about this whole, like if it's true, because it seems like it is. It takes 20 years, demoralization, destabilization, crisis, normalization. How do we fix it? Like if it's already leaked into the schools, not even leaked. There's pools of it in the schools. I remember the last training that I had to take in film and television was some lady who looked like a thin Rosie O'Donnell with gray hair, but she was clearly in her 20s. Very odd lady, big old glasses, and white lady, telling us, most of us were people of color, telling us that we're swimming in pools of white supremacy in our everyday lives. She was teaching us this. It was amazing. And teaching us about BLM. It was wild. It was crazy. It was so crazy. So if it's already gotten to that point, how is it fixed? How do we reverse any of that? How do we change any of that? I really don't know. I mean, if what they did was take advantage of the children, you know, and when I say children, I mean even like high school age. I mean, right? I've been looking for baby books and stuff. There's some real leftist, radicalized baby, feminist, standing up, protest baby, all sorts of weird books out there. But when I say child, I'm talking about the teenagers who go into college. If it starts with the children, I guess literally the way that you have to be an advocate for your own health, like you've had to in the past few years, you have to now become an advocate for your own child's education. You know, like, I don't know about you, but before 15 years ago, I'd go to the doctor and whatever the doctor said, that's just what you did. Your doctor. Give me the thing. What is it? I got to take antibiotics. Okay. Cool. I don't even care what it's called. I don't even look at the container. Use how many? Take how many? Okay. Take them now? Oh, after. Okay. I'd do whatever he said. Now? I don't know, man. So now you got to do the same thing with education. You can't just drop your kids off at a school. You have to actually walk in there. Who's your teacher? What are they all about? You got to look them up on Facebook. You have to see what flags they have in their Twitter profile, all sorts of nonsense. It's crazy. But I guess that's the only way to reverse this whole thing. And if it took 20 years, you know, Joe Rogan, he talks about a saying that they have in the pool world, because he's a pool player. He likes pool. They say you have to get better the same way you got sick, which means that there's no shortcuts. You know, same way you messed yourself up is the same way you have to get better. And that's bit by bit by bit by bit. So all of a sudden now it's going to take us 20 years. It's 2024. It's going to take until 2044 to fix all this. I have a feeling that if we did it passively, it would take that long. I think if it was abrupt, you know, not in a violent way or anything, but abrupt, like this is what's going on, this stops, that type of thing, completely legal on the up and up, following the proper channels, of course, then I think it doesn't take 20 years to fix. But it's hard to say. That's why it would be so good, moving on to my next point, it'd be so good if more scientists stood up for this type of thing. If more scientists said, I notice that people who go along with a certain narrative get funding. And when I go against it, which is what I'm supposed to do as a scientist, I get blackballed. I get my funding pulled. It sounds like, from what she was saying, it sounds like scientists are like YouTubers. You do the wrong thing and all of a sudden you're demonetized. Like, what? And it's not even like a full thing. It's just like, okay, this study that you're trying to do, demonetized. You can do that on your own. You can stand on the street corner and yell about that one. We're not helping you with that one. It's interesting. Because you think, see, a lot of people say comedy. You know, Joe's even said it. Comedy is the last stand for truth. That's not true, because those people, the best comedians that you see in the world, they're bought and sold. Cat Williams seems to be like the only one that really stood tall. Eddie Griffin, Dave Chappelle, even though he's been in a dress a couple of times, once for Howard Stern and once for a movie. You know, there's a few that stand tall. But at the end of the day, they're Hollywood people, bought and sold, easy. The majority of them. You know, the mass majority of them, bought and sold. They're actors. They just want the thing. They want the notoriety. That's it. The real last stand for truth is supposed to be science. And by this woman's, from her account, from what she's actually gone through, her experience, this is already bought as well. It's interesting. It's interesting. You know, I used to Google what my doctor would tell me. I would Google things before I went into the doctor. This is like, I don't know, 8 years ago, 9 years ago. I just Google it. And I just did it because I was like, whatever, I'll just look into it. And if it matches up with what she says, I know that this is a reliable source and blah, 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 blah. And I used to just do it just for the sake of doing it. Now, I don't even trust my doctor. I'm not telling you not to. Maybe you have a great doctor. I've had terrible doctors myself. I have one doctor right now. He's like 26. I'm 10 years older than the guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. Comes in with a full face thing. He's big gloves on. I need him to check something out for me. He can't even touch. He's like, oh, can you just tell me if your skin's warm? I'm like, oh, what is this guy? He's terrible. Absolutely terrible. Little guy, frail guy. I don't know. I sound like an old person now. You know what I mean? But I've had terrible doctors. Now I don't even listen to them. Now it's to the point where I would rather scour X and YouTube and some podcasts of some people who are like reputable scientists and listen to what they have to say than just go to my doctor and just be like, okay, tell me what's up. That's supposed to be the last holdout for truth, science, because all it is truth. All it is you do a study, you look at some things, and this is what you found. Here you go. That's it. That's all it's supposed to be. But even that's gotten captured by money. How do we fix this? How? I'm telling you, it feels like to me, I'm kind of like Joe Rogan. The way Joe Rogan always brings up AI, and he's like, that's the thing. It's going to solve everything. It's going to tie my shoes for me. It's going to take away all my emotions. And he's so happy about it. I feel that way about homesteading. I really do. I'm like, what's going to solve this? Well, what's going to solve this is if I buy 1,000 acres and I move out there with 400 people and we all have land and houses and we have people who teach and people who do medicine and people who know the herbs and people who do the cattle. And I think that's what's going to solve it. Just millions of people doing that over and over and over. I think that's the only thing that's going to solve it. I don't know. It's weird. And then another point. Liberals getting away with it the most. And this is the thing where, you know, some of you might have heard that and think, well, she's not really, like, what do you mean liberal scientists get away with it the most? Joe Rogan already interviewed James Lindsay. James Lindsay already spoke about how he actually made fake studies. He just made them up, made them seem really real, made it seem like he did a bunch of work that he didn't actually do. And they were towards the most ridiculous things in society. So ridiculous, but so woke. So they took it in and they awarded him. They gave him awards. So I definitely can see how liberal scientists are getting away with it the most. It makes sense. They're following the narrative. If you're willing to be the guy who tells everybody that XYZ works perfectly, well, then you're the guy who will go to time and time again. And you will live off of our funding and become a reputable name for the rest of your life. It's working like Hollywood. That's what Hollywood's about. Well, if you're the guy who's going to put on the dress and do the dance and make your people think this is cool, and then make all people think this is cool, and make young people think this is cool, well, then we'll make sure that you're working forever. You'll be in every single movie with The Rock. You'll be in every single, you'll have shoes. We'll give you a radio station, give you a podcast, give you a big contract. We'll do whatever you want. Give you a Nike deal. You're a comedian. You're not even supposed to get a Nike deal. You want a Nike deal? Under Armour deal? It's wild, man. It's wild. And then she was forced to resign. That is about the person that he's talking about, the president of Harvard, Dr. Gay. That's a real name. I'm not making fun of anybody. Dr. Gay was the president of Harvard, and she was actually forced to resign. But you know what's funny about it is that she wasn't forced to resign right away. And you know why? This is the whole inclusivity chain of things. She was like, she's being asked, is it okay for students to say death to the Jews? Will you condemn these people saying death to the Jews, violence towards Jewish people? And this woman, Dr. Gay, was like, well, I don't want to upset the Muslim children, so I guess I'll let them say death to the Jews. I guess I'll let that go. Just depends on the context. And then the people who heard her say that are above her said, you know what? I don't want to upset the Muslim children either. But we can't have the Muslim children saying stuff like that about Jewish children. We would fire her, but she's black. We don't know what to do. And then the person above them is like sitting with Klaus Schwab, and you're like, isn't this what you wanted? You wanted them all to fight. They're all fighting. Are we okay, sir? And Klaus is like, yes, of course we're okay. Put your mask back on and get back in the position. And he's like, yes, sir. Eyes wide shut party. Scampers off. All fours, or else he gets punished. Kidding, of course, but she did get fired. Dr. Gay did get fired eventually. She was forced to resign, and they did not want to do that because she was the first woman of color to take that position, and she wasn't in that position too long. So they wanted to be able to be Harvard, the place that has Muslim students and Jewish students, and even our president is black. We're so woke. Wokeness is backfiring left and right. Everywhere it goes. Everywhere it goes, it backfires. It's so ridiculous. So ridiculous. And then the last thing she said about focusing on race, that whole thing where they make it's so funny that the side of things that says that race and your color and your age and your creed and your mobility, all of these things don't matter. But at the same time, it's the focal point of everything they do. Right down to a scientist, which who cares what a scientist is, whether they're white or black or Asian, who cares? Only matters what's going on in their brain and what they're finding breakthroughs on. That's all that matters. But even they have to focus on race, color, age, all these things. It's so ridiculous. Anyway, that is Deborah So, who you were listening to just now. It's a pretty great episode. She is standing up quite a bit. She is pretty much getting blackballed in the scientific community, and she finds that an important thing to do because she wants to be able to do her own research, not have to go along with the narratives that are being pushed. And she's calling out a lot of things. And if more scientists were like her, we'd be in a much better place. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. It helps tremendously. And other than that, I'm out.